So hello everyone and welcome. Today we're delighted to have Simone is going to talk to us about podcasting and data music as digital sonic methods for post-COVID research. Over to you, Simone.
Thank you, Sarah. Great to be here. Let me share my screen with you. And I think you should be able to see it now. Great. Okay, so today I'm talking about podcasting and data music as digital sonic methods for post-COVID research. It's all work that came out of my thesis that I produced for when I was an MPhil student in education at the University of Cambridge a year and a half ago. And this image that you see here is the cover of the music album called Please Hold, which was the final outcome that I produced after I completed my research. And I'll share today about my work process. So I've been thinking a lot about spoken word in academia and how we typically tend to privilege the written word over spoken word. And I'm trying to challenge that. So thinking about how writing is a way of thinking, but speaking too is a way of thinking. And in my experience, they sometimes lead to different results, where writing is often a bit more individualized and spoken word can be shared with others in dialogue or conversations with multiple people. But even myself, sometimes to order my thoughts, I speak out loud to myself, and it helps me give structure to what I'm thinking, and sometimes in different ways than what I do when I am writing. And so I'm interested in teasing out those differences and sort of denaturalizing the taken for granted status of writing in academia as the one way to produce knowledge and validate knowledge and publish it. And I'm interested in the voice and what voices tell us. And in research, we often talk about our research participants' voices and how we represent them, and putting them at the center of our research. But I'm interested in not just metaphorically speaking about representing people's voices in this way, but actually literally putting them center stage. And one of the ways in which I've done that is through podcasting and thinking about how this gives us an embodied understanding through the voice. So just an overview of my workflow, and then I'll go into each of these things in more detail. Everything started for me with a podcast to look at the future of post-COVID higher education and hopes and fears that were held by students and faculty members at the faculty I was part of at Cambridge. So that started with a podcast, and that led to research interviews, which I transcribed and coded and analyzed. And then that data and the emerging themes I used to write data poems with. And as a final step, I translated the poems into spoken word performances, for which I composed music, and I released that as the album titled Please Hold. So everything is centered around this key research question: how students and academics at the Cambridge Faculty of Education reimagine a post-COVID future of higher education. And that was a question that came up for me when I was a student there during the year 2019-2020, which was in many ways a year marked by disruption. Not just COVID-19, although that was definitely a major crisis, but also during the first two terms we had industrial strikes, which disrupted higher education. And I felt severely impacted, and my whole faculty was severely impacted by the conversations that were sparked after the brutal death of George Floyd, and the debates that were started around institutional racism, including at Cambridge and adult faculty, which really produced a climate of crisis and a climate of conflict, where I, as a student studying education with the ambition of, remaining within the field of higher education in my career, was really struggling to make sense of all of that when all of the higher education institutions seem to be crumbling around me and falling apart, and undoing themselves along these fault lines of crisis. And I read Hannah Arendt's essay, The Crisis in Education, where she writes that a crisis forces us back to the questions themselves and requires from us either new or old answers, but in any case, direct judgments. What distinguishes a crisis from a disaster is when we respond to it with preformed judgment, with prejudice. So what we need to do is not answer with prejudice, not return to business as usual practices or try to pretend nothing major has happened, but really to come up with reflection and look for new or old answers, but in any case, as she writes, direct judgments. So back to the major underlying questions themselves, which we often not even think about anymore, such as like the very basic ones. What is the point of education? What is the purpose of a university? What kind of position should it embody within society at large? Existential philosophical questions. And I wanted to do that process of reflection in a way that avoided adding to more eye strain and screen fatigue, because at that time, all classes had already been moved online. I was doing all my reading on my laptop, all my writing on here, even all social events were taking place over Zoom. And so, as many others experienced, I felt very fatigued by spending so much time in front of the screen. I had like physical issues with my eyes. And so I wanted to use a different sensory engagement to do with knowledge production. And secondly, I wanted to mitigate the experience of isolation and disconnection because I was no longer able to meet up with peers or meet professors or faculty members. And so a lot of people felt very isolated from the experience of the academic community that we had before COVID started. And this led me to start a podcast called Cambridge Popcorn Chats. So dealing with audio rather than the vision. I really enjoyed the embodied aspect of being able to go for a walk and listen to podcasts. Also a very intimate sense of listening to something or someone or other people's voices, because you're often listening through headphones or earbuds, literally bringing other people's voices beyond the borders of your own body. It felt like a different kind of connection, and connecting back also with my own body and learning as I'm walking, as I'm listening to something. So I'm really interested in the potential of podcasts and also in producing them. This was a format that was a weekly sort of episode with every time a different guest speaker that came from the Cambridge community. And they would be 30-minute chats on life during lockdown, working, studying during COVID-19 at the university, and what people's hopes and fears were for what this might mean for the future of higher education. And so the topics that we covered were really broad, from how to set up a good home office to climate change in a future university to even what it's like to be a college porter at a Cambridge college, or addressing the topic of institutional racism and how to be an anti-racist ally, the refugee crisis. And so that was very broad, and I intentionally curated the platform in such a way that I wanted to disrupt institutional hierarchies as much as possible, which meant I very deliberately put an interview with an undergrad student right next to an interview with the head of faculty, next to an interview with the college porter, to really get disrupt the hierarchies and get a very expanded view on what members of the Cambridge community were experiencing during this time. So this then for me started to develop into a podcasting methodology, where I started thinking about podcasting as a format for digital storytelling. What I mentioned before, the sense of embodiment and intimacy, corporeal intimacy, at a time when we have to be socially, physically distant from one another in order to keep safe from the virus. This can be a way to have that physical sort of sensory participation in learning, which I think is very important. The body occupies a very important role in learning and teaching and studying. And this is when I started to develop it as a method. And this is a bit from my thesis, where I'm reflecting on a podcast as a space where proximity to other people and their personal narratives occurs through the human voice and its emotive power, which takes up into its own body the potential for existentially embodied education. So at a time when our bodies are disappearing from educational contexts to keep safe from the virus, podcasting can be a re-embodying method and medium. And I had really interesting people come on the show, like Dina Nawaz, who was a peer student of mine, and we talked about storytelling as a way to create change, positive change, institutional change even. And this is a quote from her, where she says that the future isn't fixed, and fiction lets you realize that at any point in time you can start creating new stories, build resilience and adaptability. And this idea is really important to me, where the method of podcasting itself became a way to create change, even as an individual student, together with peer students of mine, with other members of the faculty, to start using this moment of crisis to really reimagine, be creative, and come up with fictional ideas on what this might mean for the future, because obviously the future hasn't happened yet. It is a fictional thing. It is something that we imagine all the time, and we create policies to try to create a particular kind of future. So we can influence it, but it's non-existent. Even sometimes it seems as if the future is already fixed or predetermined. There is some space for us there to reimagine. And so that was one of the things that the podcast really tried to do. I want to listen to a brief podcast fragment from the final episode, which was also the conclusion of my thesis. So the examiners and the people who were reading had to actually go to Spotify or another platform to listen to this to get to the conclusion of the thesis. And in here, the format is flipped. I'm not the one interviewing, but I'm being interviewed by Eleanor, who's another student at the same faculty. And we were talking about what this podcasting dynamics means for ways in which we reflect about the future. And so I'm gonna just briefly share my sound.
Wondering whether it's something to do with the performative element of the podcast. And I'm wondering how this connects to the body and the embodiment. You've talked a lot to me privately, and it's in your thesis as well, about embodiment and in the embodiment of education. And I think, like, even sitting here now, like, I'm listening to you intently and my body is leaning forward. I'm leaning into you, into the computer and into the microphone, and I'm really focused and engaged. And I think it's because perhaps I know that people are listening, but listening hopefully in an engaged way. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that. And I mean, I'm thinking about it a lot as actually I'm a violinist and I'm used to performing. I perform a lot. And there's something about what happens at that moment of performance and performativity and how that helps us kind of coalesce our thoughts or coalesce our expression in some way.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Maybe it has to do something with the adrenaline, because you do
you're realizing you are performing, so you're very much immersed in the present, in the here and now, not even just speaking on a podcast, but also listening to them. I found that really fascinating, because when we listen to podcasts, the great thing is we have them on our phones. We carry those with us everywhere we go. We carry a pair of earbuds, headphones, and we just put them in and we listen to someone speaking to us. It's a very intimate kind of listening, more so than radio, because you are literally putting headphones into your body, bringing other voices into your body, gaining this corporeal sense of intimacy. And that is very important for me, precisely at this time of crisis, when the university and its activities are increasingly shifting to online spaces. And that is really interesting when you bring that sense of embodiment into conversations, and also the performativity on a podcast. How does bringing the body into conversations lead to different kinds of knowing, understanding, communicating, being? Okay. That was just a brief fragment. So I'm connecting the idea of corporeal intimacy that I already talked about to this idea of performativity. And podcasting is an inherently outward-facing public platform. And so there's some limitations that come with that I'll speak on as well. But also it comes with some interesting advantages, let's say, where there's no live audience, but you are aware as you're recording, this will be uploaded, people are going to be listening to that, and that changes the way in which you talk. There's something about the dynamics. When I'm listening and when I start editing an episode, I can tell you exactly where I start recording, not by listening to what I'm saying, but to how I'm speaking. My voice just changes, it goes up a little bit, it becomes more animated. There is an element of performativity, and it gives you just that bit of awareness and adrenaline that leads to a different dynamics that has somehow led to a really revealing kinds of truth telling, where afterwards people would come back to me and be like, wow, I had no idea where that all just came from, or that this is what I thought or felt about it, but it just came up. And it is a different kind of energetic vibe or vibrancy. I don't know what it is exactly, but it creates something really beautiful and interesting. Okay, let me switch back to the PowerPoint. So for me, there's two ways in which I used podcasting. The first being as an action research method. So I'm reimagining the future, but I'm doing that through reimagining method, where part of my hopes for a future university would be to create a place where we have more space for creativity, for embodied knowing and learning and being, for spoken ways of engaging with one another and validating knowledge. For more open access publishing. And so I'm using the method itself to do the work, to reimagine, but also start to create that future in that community setting. So method as a way of taking action, of politically intervening, even as a student who is typically not the most powerful position you can have in an institutional hierarchy of a university. And method as artful activism. I'm really interested in that combination of art and activism. So I like to think of the podcast as an agora, as a public space where people come together. It's outward facing, public, it's freely accessible. You can reach audiences inside and outside academia. And it's very collaborative, very democratic, or it can be at least, to produce knowledge through podcasting. What I then did is I did a second set after the podcast interviews of private interviews, because, as I said earlier, the awareness that it's going to be out on a public platform does lead to some measures of self-censorship, depending on the topic that you're talking about. So if I am you know, if I'm interviewing a student, perhaps it's not as present there yet, but if I'm interviewing the head of faculty, she's going to be very aware of her position and of answering my questions in line with institutional policies and those things. If it would be a mess behind the scenes, she's not going to say it like that. But in a private interview, perhaps she might. And the same thing I experienced sometimes with students who were applying for PhDs at Cambridge, and they didn't want to say things that were too sort of controversial in their opinion. And so for me, this was important to do 2 sets, and also to be able to witness how people would speak differently. I connected them through podcast elicitation. So I went to the podcast interviews and I selected fragments from the different conversations that had to do with the questions I was seeking to address in the research. And I edited them into a compilation that was about 45 minutes long. And each fragment I proceeded by explaining who the speaker was and where we had sort of what we'd been talking about to sort of help situate the listener. And I chose fragments deliberately in such a way that there would be contrasts and differences of opinion and different perspectives. So people listening to this in preparation for the private interview had food for thought, things to think about before coming into the interview. For the sake of time, I might just skip this. This is just an example of a fragment, but if you listen to the podcast, you'll hear there's a lot of different things in there. What I wanted to do is make a collection of fragments that spoke to different ways of answering questions about hopes and fears for the future, that would help participants sort of navigate those very abstract, very broad, big questions. So podcast elicitation was a way to help elicit rich responses, specifically because it is such an abstract thing, talking about the future, and it is quite intimidating, I would imagine, for participants if I were to ask them, okay, tell me, what are your visions for the future? It's too much. And so it was for them to be able to refer to people on a podcast that had said certain things, to be able to quote or paraphrase and use that as building blocks to be like, well, Dina said this on a podcast, but Samina said that, and actually I agree with this. I'm not sure about that, but I think that's such and so. Was very helpful, and it created that sense of intertextuality that's also really interesting. And audio specifically is quite unique in the sense that it is very co-creative. It's like when you're reading something, you're reading a novel and you're starting yourself to imagine what the place must look like, or the characters, or what their voices sound like, or what it smells like. So you are very much involved in this process of visualizing what is being told. And audio does the same thing, which is different from if you're using visual photo elicitation, for instance. The interviews were structured around a temporal framework: pre-COVID past, what people were missing from before COVID, then the pandemic present, experiences of teaching and learning online, and then imagining a post-COVID future, which was divided into a post-pandemic dystopia and utopia. And this structure also comes back in the spoken word album that I eventually made, which has 4 tracks, the first on the past, second on the present, and then the third and fourth on dystopias and utopias. So I had ended up with quite a bit of data. I'd done 10 private interviews with students, undergrads, postgrads, and faculty members. And I wanted to analyze it and process it in such a way that it did justice to the emotionality that was, and the physicality that was present in these interviews, because we've been talking about hopes and fears and embodiments as a recurring theme. I didn't want to just transcribe and analyze and write down, well, out of 10 respondents, 8 mentioned that they feared a fully online university, or that they felt lonely, or whatever, because you understand that rationally, but you won't actually feel it, or it won't be as easy to connect with that statement at at a physical level, and I wanted to create that, to have that kind of impact on a reader / listener. So I turned to poetry, because poetry is a great way of conveying meanings in that sense. And for me, it was a way to let the data speak and reimagine itself. So I transcribed the interviews, I coded, I categorized, I did all the analysis using grounded theory as my framework. But then after going through that process, I took several data fragments from these different conversations and wrote them into sensorial collages, data poems. And initially I did that in a very visual way. So this is what some of the poems look like. This is a more traditional outlet, but then layouts, but then they get quite funky in written formats. Some examples. Some of this work is published also in Poetry magazine, which was quite nice to do, working with images and text display. The words crumble, literally crumbling, falling apart. So that is what I did, but then I felt like I wasn't done quite yet. And so I turned to the second method of data music. So going from data poetry to data music. So I went in for a second round of analysis, and I listened again to the interviews, this time not listening so much to what people were saying, but how they were saying it, how they were speaking, where they put the emphasis. Did they laugh? Did they cry? Did they sound despaired? Were they silent? Were they raising their voice? What was their intonation like? Were they joking? All those kinds of things that are not textual or not verbal, but very much present in the voice and how we communicate. So I took notes on that, listening, analyzing again, and used that set of data to create the spoken word performances of the poems. And we'll listen to some fragments. I think most of you will have listened to it because of the publication, but still, just some small snippets to see and to also listen to it with this thought in mind, which I find quite intriguing, and that is the concept of intertextuality and how it operates here. So when you're listening for the first time, very superficially, you're listening to my voice, and that's what a lot of people make that mistake of thinking that this is my opinion or my thoughts. It's not. You're listening to my physical voice, but I'm voicing the voices of others. They're not my words. So it's the words of the people that I did the private interviews with. So that is what you see on a second level. But then on a third level, what's revealed is another layer, because the people in the private interviews are reflecting on and responding to what they listened in a podcast. So even those people from the podcast, you'll hear their voices echoing through this material. Okay. So I'm just going to switch to Spotify to play just a couple of fragments. Okay, so this is a small fragment from the first track, I Miss, which is which compiles people's responses to my question of what they missed from pre-COVID-19 higher education.
I miss being in a classroom with people doing work together with others in a library or in a cafe without talking, simply feeling I'm not alone. I miss the university cafes and afternoons of coffee with colleagues and the occasional piece of cake. Hearing people talking in the background and music playing softly under cafe lights. I miss the smells, the tones, the sounds, vibrations, all these aesthetic aspects of being together, physically nourish and sustain this dreary work of dissertations. I miss feeling like I'm part of an academic community, the in-between study breaks where you are with peers and someone asks you, have you read this or that yet? Then you go, no, but tell me more. I miss being out with people, interacting face to face, understanding each other's emotions, running into people randomly, starting conversations spontaneously in corridors. I miss that sense of somebody else, not even through touch, but by occupying the same physical space. That sense of presence with people in person. I miss human contact.
Okay, that was about half of the track. So there's a mix of student and academic voices in here, and you can't quite tell who says what, which is part of this work. But you can definitely see an emergent theme. There was a lot of people speaking about missing being in the same space, the physical space, learning in the same classroom, just the proximity of other people's bodies, not even touching each other, but simply just feeling like you're part of something else, of a larger thing. This was the first track I created, and mind you, I was not a poet or identified as such, and this was all very new to me, and it was more it's the only a cappella track, so it's only voice. It's very intimate. I was like on top of the microphone as I was recording it to create that, to emphasize that physical proximity, and really emphasize the message that this track was conveying. So that's I Miss. We'll listen to a part, just a smaller bit of the second track, which is completely different. This one is way more theatrical. It has a lot of found sound edits, or found sounds edited into it. References that I wasn't even familiar with, made by people from a different generation that I had to look up, like Max Headroom. Things like this. Let's listen, and I'll say just a few more words after that.
Oh, I should probably check my email. Hold on. Did I call my supervisor yet? Oh no, I forgot to order those shoes.
Okay,
and
let's
it
just
was ending tomorrow.
check
Instagram before working. Oh, hold on. Maybe I should
Eliza
order some
great.
Peter's already calling me to deliver a new friend request. Do I know this person?
I should really get
Wait
to
a second.
work.
I thought that conference was next week, not today.
Then I should
oh my
probably
God,
ask
this
them to
deadline
deliver
is
me
people
the
days
results.
out. Let's
Okay.
just check those
Okay.
emails as I enter this meeting. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Great. I'm sorry I'm late. I had the most chaotic morning. Let me explain to you. Oftentimes, working together on a screen just feels like another distraction. I already have 1,000 tabs open of things I'm supposed to read and emails stacking up. To have a Zoom screen in a corner, adding to more screen time and dissonance, I just find that to be slightly unpleasant. Education becomes just another video to watch, like the YouTube and Netflix we already consume. Or maybe it's the fact that I'm just sitting in a room, alone. Even though we are talking in real time, there's nobody there.
Okay. That's the opening of the second track, which I think was the most labor to produce because it has so many different elements. I think I took the most artistic liberty, let's say, with this track, because I really designed a narrator who's, say, like basically picking up the phone, and you have the opening where there's all these voices overlapping, which reproduces this sense of having like 1,000 different tabs open, and you're receiving a Zoom call, but you're also signing up for a conference, and you're trying to order shoes on Amazon, and you're also receiving a friend request from someone on Facebook. So that is an experience that we can all relate to, I think, working online in this way. And a lot of people describe that. And obviously I can tell you, oh, people felt a lot of digital distraction, that's it. And you'll get it. But if I produce it like that and I communicate like that, you'll really get it. And you'll be like, yes, I can totally relate to that. Or I can really, in a very sort of sensorial, physical way, there's a response that's evoked. And so there's the question of, can you hear me? Things like that we all say at the beginning of a conversation, like, oh, can you hear me? Can you see me? Is it functioning well? Those things are all things that I regarded as data in the interviews that I conducted, which were online. And those questions were being asked by people. Can you hear me? Okay, that is actually a piece of data. Same thing, if you listen to the full track, somewhere midway through, the connection drops. It just, Wi-Fi stops working, and you'll hear my voice, it starts to stutter and disappear. And then the connection completely drops, and you have a computerized voice that says, whoops, looks like something went wrong. Due to poor connection, this audio has been paused. Please hold as we'll take you back into the poem. So that is, again, a little bit of an artistic twist to the notification that Zoom or Skype gives you whenever you get a loading, icon, and tells you to wait. So that's the title as well of the album, Please Hold, as we, try to fix this connection again, which is also at a deeper level. A lot of people have had to put their lives and their careers on hold in that sense. Or smaller things like shutting down your computer and then realizing that you're actually alone in a room like we are now. It feels like maybe we're together, but actually when I look around me, there's no one here. So when you leave a meeting, that can feel like an overwhelming sense of isolation. And so I edited that into, like small things, like a sound effect on alone that is echoing to sort of reinforce what's being said there. That is the second track. And it's the longest one, 6 minutes. So if you haven't listened to it in full, I recommend it because there's a lot of things that happen along the way. Let's listen to one more fragment, and then we'll have time to wrap up and maybe questions. We'll listen to the fourth track. The third one, Not Really Real, is the one that I'm leaving out for now. It's about the dystopia, so what people do not want. And this, I also recommend you listen. There's a lot of horror sound effects that's edited into it. This was the track actually that was also picked up by BBC radio, and that was played on national radio quite a few times. But I want to share a fragment from More Human, which is the final track, which is people's responses to what they imagine as a utopia. Let me find a spot. I will start it from somewhere.
More human. Of profit seeking, which tends to be.
Find the right spot. Okay.
But like, it's not the point. The point of education is to make you more human. More human. You see, the point of education is to make you more human. More human. The point of education is to make you more human. More human. The point of education is to make you more human. Within fields of education, we're so focused on measuring things like learning outcomes and profitability or progress. Yet how do you measure your humanity? For me, this crisis is ultimately about human life, an evaluation of human life, and the depth and the experience of human life, in which human beings get to count as being human. Right now, the people who are human are those on the winning side of profit seeking, which tends to be, surprise, white guys. And I despair. A future utopia would need to reconfigure what it means to be human, and for me this involves the abolition of whiteness as a thing. When I imagine my future hopes, I envision a world in which whiteness no longer operates as, quite frankly, a death-seeking cult. The point of education is to make you more human. More human. You see, the point of education is to make you more human. Human. The point of education is to make you more human. More human. The point of education is to make you more human. The next question becomes, how do we organize education with this utopia in mind? Well, by accounting for alternative knowledges, by understanding the nature of our bodily being, by trying to be speculative and coming up with a new vocabulary for a world that isn't defined by the racial capitalist logic of who's human and who's not. What does that mean for a university, though? I don't really know. Maybe it means that these places ultimately need to crumble. Maybe it does mean they need to do just that. Maybe it means exactly that. More human. The point of education is to make you. Say the point of education is to make you more human. More human.
Okay. That was apart from the final track. I wanted to share this with you because there's another layer of intertextuality that's embedded here, which is when there's someone talking about, or several people, because a lot of people brought up the topic of dehumanization through online learning, is this idea of who's human, what does it mean, who's more human than others, and the relationship with whiteness. So some of these reflections came from a professor at the faculty who, for instance, has been reading a lot of Sylvia Wynter's work, or particular theories and thinkers. And you can just hear those theories sort of echoing through me realizing that, because I've been taught by him, and I know what he talks about, or he's been reading. And so these are additional layers of intertextuality where people are impacted by what they've been reading and how they respond to these questions. And that is particularly present amongst academics more than students who are still sort of learning a lot and not as familiar with, sort of what discourses they're into or what theories. What was also interesting is to see that students typically were a lot more optimistic than academics. I think spending more time in these institutions makes you eventually lose a bit of optimism or idealism. And I had some really interesting conversations about this particular observation with those academics. And a lot of people comment listening to this that it sounds like a political manifesto. It definitely has, it's quite a powerful thing. And so I went for a lo-fi beats vibe kind of musical composition, which is the kind of stuff that I listen to whenever I have to focus or study, to help people focus on the lyrics, on what is being said. And then you have the chorus repeating, the point of education is to make you more human, literally making that point over and over again, which is a quote from actually an undergrad student who shared that reflection with me in the interview. Yeah, so in just one more minute and I'll wrap up this presentation. So I think for me, taking the podcast and the album together, there's an overarching activistic purpose, an artfully activistic purpose of creating space for multimedia, creative, embodying, sound-based practices for producing and communicating knowledge in that future university, and to counterbalance and challenge the hegemony of the written word in academia, and doing so by designing and using different creative research methods that are focused on the sonic and on storytelling in this case. Yeah, and for me, a big part of that has been, well, being out on public open access platforms and promoting this work to reach different audiences, not just academic ones, but also beyond that. I submitted one of the tracks to BBC Music Introducing. It was picked up by Radio Cambridgeshire, and then BBC Radio 6 played it, and it was picked up on different places. It wasn't just a work that was peer reviewed in the academic sense, but it was also reviewed by music journalists that wrote their own reviews. And so there's, different ways of getting input and people's reflections and own ways of engaging with this material that I find really interesting. And for me is all part of this activistic way of doing research. And yeah, like I mentioned before, publishing also in poetry magazines is part of that too. And it won the Bira Award last year, the dissertation prize, which for me was quite meaningful in the sense that this was a recognition from a very sort of traditional institution that actually there is more space being created for this kind of creative work. And I think that is very encouraging to keep doing this. And yeah, this is a list of where you can find the album. I can put the link. I think someone already put the link, and here's my email if you want to reach out, but I think most of you already know where to find me. So thank you so much for listening.
Wow, that was absolutely amazing. I've got literally about 20 questions written down to ask you, but I'm going to hand over to everybody else. I see Scott's got to rush off, but does anybody else have any questions or thoughts?
Yeah, thanks for that. That was really interesting. I was wondering, I'm really interested in podcasting as in like that conversation and how that's a really interesting kind of pedagogical way that we could change how we teach rather than just like listening, or listening to a conversation and participating in it is much more engaging. And I was really interested to see that you use grounded theory, which I used in my PhD. So I'm always excited when I see someone else drawing on grounded theory. I was wondering about your participants, and how did you get your participants to engage with the podcast?
Mm-hmm. You mean the private interview participants?
No, just any of them really.
Yeah, so there was the people who came on as guest speakers on the podcast. And then there was the people who listened to the compilation that I created for the private interviews. The podcast started not as a research method, but as literally a way for me and to communicate and be in touch with others, as I said, way at the beginning. And then it developed into a method. And so the people that I invited on there I sort of explained what this was about. And I think that was an interesting part of ethics, where you make sure that people are aware that there's not going to be anonymity, and they are fully informed on what's going on. And I often gave people the opportunity to listen to the final edited products before publishing. And I would find these people, sometimes people would come to me to sort of offer to be a guest speaker, but most times I would sort of do a personal invitation for someone, because it was an easier way for me to get participants rather than having an open call. And again, just always very intentionally as diverse as I could possibly be, and as disruptive of the institutional hierarchies as I could be. And then with the second part, I had instructions for people who did private interviews on how to engage with the podcast as an elicitation device, how to take note of things they agreed with, disagreed with, if they could identify any gaps, because obviously I couldn't cover all the perspectives out there. There was going to be perspectives that were going to be excluded. So I had sort of a list of things that allowed people to engage with the device in this very structured way, and then respond to those people. And most people knew each other because they were all from the same faculty, same community. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
I just have a comment to make, and I think that's just how much, you contextualizing the whole story with your voice, coupled with the recordings, made it so much more personalized than reading the paper. And I think that demonstrated the point admirably that you're making, that the podcast is so personal, and it does actually evoke a very emotional response. So when you're hearing that kind of utopian vision, it really appeals to you as an individual. So I think it's just such a lovely thing. It's just I don't know, it just kind of got me a little bit choked up a little bit when I was listening to it. No, I'm admiration of your whole approach. I think it's brilliant.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I've got a question, Simone. You said that you didn't think of yourself as a poet at the beginning. Do you think of yourself as a poet now?
I do sometimes introduce myself as a poet, depending on, because I've been giving a lot of talks, and sometimes I've been giving talks to poetry students, and then I'll be like, yeah, I'm a poet. But then other times I'm a musician or a researcher, artist. It always differs how I introduce myself. I used to think I didn't like poetry. I still don't really read poetry. I find it difficult to connect with it, but I really have been impacted by spoken word performances times that I've gone to these occasions. So I think reading poetry or spoken word is very different, and I find spoken word very appealing, very powerful, very emotive, like gives me goosebumps often. And so I think, am I a poet? I don't know. I didn't come up with the words. I don't know if you have to come up with the words in order to be a poet. I feel it's quite collaborative, because I'm literally taking quotes and I'm making it into a collage. That is what it is. But it definitely requires you to look at it with a poetic lens and a musical lens, and look at, okay, how is this going to sound? Is this rhythmic? How can I create a chorus? How does this sort of, how long should that bit be? So you're definitely looking at it. You're trying to aesthetically shape it up in a sonic way. So feeling conflicted. Sometimes I'm a poet, sometimes I'm not. A word composer. I love that, Natalie.
Yes, and found poetry is definitely a thing, and it's a big thing. I'm looking at the time. My clock says it's 1:01. Vicky, your comment about doing an audio clap is absolutely spot on. Let's all unmute and let's give Simone a clap. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
It's going to stop recording.
Thanks for that, guys. Into head.